So picture this, right? A child walks into an office, sits down, and just explicitly says, I am in danger.
Yeah, which, I mean, that almost never happens.
Exactly. In the world of school safeguarding, that is incredibly rare. So, raises the question, how do you solve a mystery when literally no one will admit there's been a crime?
Well, you really have to think like a detective.
Right, and that is exactly what we're digging into for today's deep dive. We've got this really fascinating document, and it's titled, What a DSL Can Learn from a Detective.
And just to orient everyone listening, a DSL is a designated safeguarding lead.
Yeah, if you are in education, or specifically in that really high context world of international schools, that acronym might be totally new to you.
Right, but these are the professionals whose entire mandate, I mean, their whole job is to keep vulnerable people, mostly children and young adults, safe from harm.
Which is a huge responsibility. And the immense pressure of that role, it really comes from the absolute lack of clarity that they face every single day.
Oh, absolutely. A DSL rarely has all the facts just, laid out neatly on a table for them.
Right. They are operating in this environment of just partial information. They have to interpret incredibly subtle behavioral signals and navigate these narratives that are not just uncertain, but often deliberately contradictory.
The stakes are basically as high as they get, but the visibility is near zero.
Yeah, which makes this source material so compelling to me. It takes that high-pressure, low-visibility reality, and it pairs it with this concept of disciplined curiosity.
I love that phrase.
Right. It asks you to apply the patient, deeply observant mindset of a great detective to the safeguarding world. And we aren't talking about, the action movie cop kicking down doors.
No, definitely not. Think more along the lines of Columbo.
Yes. The rumpled investigator who is, already halfway out the door, and he pauses, turns around and says, just one more thing.
Exactly. He doesn't lead with this big accusation. He creates space. He notices the tiny friction points in a room that, honestly, other people just completely overlook.
And the fundamental mechanism driving that Columbo mindset, it's the understanding that behavior speaks long before verbal disclosure ever happens.
Right. A master detective in the field, they don't sit at a desk waiting for a signed confession to just slide under the door.
They're actively reading the baseline of their environment.
Yeah, they look for that pause in a conversation that kind of defies the natural rhythm of human speech. Or, they look for a physical reaction to a totally mundane question that is weirdly disproportionate.
Because they're hunting for the spaces where the narrative just doesn't align with the physical reality.
Exactly. And a DSL has to apply that exact same mechanism to a school setting.
Because, as the document points out, explicit disclosure is a terrible metric for measuring safety. If you are waiting for a student to, articulate their trauma, you are usually miles behind the actual crisis.
So what the DSL is actually looking for are the ripples on the surface of the water, right? The ones indicating something massive is moving underneath.
Right. They are watching for deviations from a student's baseline.
Yeah. A sudden, jarring shift in mood. Or a student who goes from really energetic to chronically sleep-deprived.
Or it might manifest as social withdrawal, like severing ties with a long-term friend group with zero explanation.
And interestingly, the source notes that trauma or risk, it doesn't always look like withdrawal or rebellion.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, it frequently manifests as sudden overcompliance or, a hyper-independence where a child violently refuses any assistance because their environment has basically taught them that adults cannot be trusted to help.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because just putting myself in the shoes of someone working in a high school, that sounds like a mathematical impossibility.
It is definitely overwhelming.
Right. Teenagers are essentially walking, talking collections of shifting moods, severed friendships, and sudden sleep deprivation. That's just being a teen.
Oh, absolutely.
So how does a DSL parse the difference between completely normal adolescent brain development and an actual signal of profound risk?
It's tricky.
It feels like opening the door to a teenager's messy bedroom, right? There are clothes everywhere, old plates on the desk, the blinds are drawn. Is the mess just a mess because they're a lazy teenager? Or is that mess a behavioral clue that they're severely depressed and quietly drowning?
Right, and if you treat every messy room as a crisis, you'll become completely paranoid.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is that the international school context acts like a magnifying glass for that exact difficulty.
Oh, because of the different backgrounds.
Yeah, you are no longer just trying to parse normal adolescent development. You are layering on profound cultural friction.
Right. Right.
In many cultures, expressing emotional pain or asking an outside adult for help is highly stigmatized. So a student might be internally collapsing while maintaining this flawless, high-achieving facade just because their culture demands it.
Wow. And then layer on the language barriers, right? A child might not possess the linguistic nuance in their second or third language to articulate a complex feeling of unsafety.
Precisely. And then there are the high-stakes family dynamics. In these international environments, a parent's visa or lucrative corporate employment might be completely tied to their behavior.
Right. So the child knows that if they speak up, they might trigger a deportation or destroy their family's livelihood.
Exactly. That actively suppresses any urge to rock the boat.
So the messy room isn't just a messy room. You might not speak the language of the person who made the mess. Their culture dictates they can never admit the mess exists. And, acknowledging the mess could literally get their family deported.
That is the incredibly heavy reality of the role, and that is why the detective's skill of connecting disparate, microscopic clues is basically non-negotiable.
Because to a detective, a slightly misplaced chair or a single unreturned phone call isn't background noise. It's a data point.
Yes. To a DSL, a missed sign out from the boarding house on a Tuesday is a data point. A student making repeated, vague visits to the medical center with stomach aches that have no physiological cause, that is a data point.
Because you have to act on what the source calls professional noticing.
Exactly. Historically, when you review major safeguarding failures, they are almost never the result of one massive, glaring oversight by a malicious adult.
Right, they're usually the tragic culmination of dozens of tiny, seemingly unconnected misses that no one in the system bothered to string together.
Exactly.
But, professional noticing only gets you so far. Because once you've noticed the missed signouts and the mysterious stomach aches, you have to actually engage. You have to sit across from that student and talk to them.
And that is the hardest part.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the human instinct for a caring adult, especially an educator, who suspects a child is hurting, is the exact opposite of what actually works.
Oh, completely.
Like when we think someone is in trouble, our instinct is to rush in. We want to rapid-fire questions, pull the truth out of them, and solve the mystery. We really just want to fill the void.
We want to rescue the interaction. But in safeguarding, rescuing the interaction destroys the disclosure.
Wow. Destroy is a strong word.
But it's true. Think about how a master detective conducts an interview. They do not drag someone into a room and immediately start firing specific allegations.
Right. They don't say, did you do it at 9 p.m.?
No. They ask incredibly expansive open questions. Help me understand your day yesterday, or what happened next. And then, crucially, they shut up.
They just sit there.
They intentionally allow the narrative to unfold at whatever messy, fragmented pace the subject chooses.
Which goes against every instinct an educator has.
Yeah.
Teachers are literally trained to prompt, to scaffold, to guide a student to the right answer.
Exactly.
If a student is struggling to find a word in the classroom, the teacher steps in and provides it to ease their anxiety. But the source is really adamant that doing that in a safeguarding context actively contaminates the narrative.
It does. Let's look at the psychology of why that contamination happens. A child in a state of distress or trauma is highly suggestible. Their brain is flooded with cortisol. They are sitting across from an adult, an authority figure, and their primary psychological drive in that moment might just be to appease the adult and escape the uncomfortable situation.
So if the adult uses a leading question like, did he hit you? Or if the adult gets impatient with the silence and says, are you upset because of what happened in the locker room?
Yes. The child's brain will often just latch on to that suggested answer. They will say yes just to comply or no out of fear. You haven't uncovered the truth. You've merely implanted your own assumption into their mouth.
That is terrifying. Which means the burden is entirely on the adult to manage their own discomfort.
Absolutely.
You have to rely on gentle, open prompts, maintain a completely neutral tone, and basically endure an almost agonizing level of silence.
But why does silence work so well as a tool for disclosure?
Because silence transfers the cognitive burden back to the speaker. When an adult refuses to fill the void, the child is forced to process their own thoughts without relying on external scaffolding. They have to find their own words.
And the source ties this directly to a concept called presence over performance.
I really like that phrase.
It's powerful. In these highly charged moments, the adult's calm, grounded physical presence is exponentially more important than hitting the exact right vocabulary.
Yeah, the source highlights this profound reality. Years after a disclosure, students rarely remember the specific phrasing the adult used, but they have a visceral, lasting memory of how safe they felt in that room.
Exactly. And achieving that requires a physical operational shift. You have to consciously drop your shoulders, slow your speaking pace, push the laptop away, and literally train your nervous system to sit comfortably within the deep discomfort of silence.
Because the quality of the space you leave after your question completely dictates the quality of the disclosure you receive.
Spot on.
I'm just picturing an educator sitting in that silence, practically biting their tongue to stop themselves from rescuing the kid from the awkwardness. It takes massive self-regulation.
It really does.
But let's say it works. The silence does its job. The child begins to disclose or gives a very strong signal that a serious risk is present. The immediate temptation, especially for a Type A school administrator, is to leap out of the chair, assemble a team, and just fix the problem by the end of the school day.
Oh, absolutely. But that rush to resolution is exactly where investigations fall apart.
Wow.
Even for actual detectives, early assumptions are fatal. The moment a detective decides they know what happened, confirmation bias takes over.
They unconsciously filter out any new evidence that contradicts their shiny new theory.
Right, and they only focus on the clues that prove them right. Exceptional detectives deliberately hold multiple conflicting hypotheses in their minds simultaneously. They let the evidence challenge their assumptions, and they stay open to different realities far longer than feels emotionally comfortable.
The source gives that practice a specific name, right? Professional ambiguity tolerance.
Yes. Having the discipline to separate the raw, objective facts of a situation from your emotional interpretation of those facts and strictly refusing to build a cohesive narrative too early.
Okay, so what does this all mean in practice? Because it's really easy to preach ambiguity tolerance in a deep dive, but let's look at the actual ecosystem a DSL operates in.
It's tough.
It was literally an ecosystem of panic. You have teachers who are deeply distressed and demanding to know what is being done for their student. You have school leaders and principals terrified of institutional risk, wanting the crisis contained and resolved by 3 p.m.
Right.
And you have parents who might be angry, litigious, and terrified, banging on the office door demanding black and white certainty right this second. How does a DSL look a furious parent or a stressed principal in the eye and say, I am practicing professional ambiguity tolerance. We're just holding space right now.
Haha, yeah, that wouldn't go over well. The friction you're describing between institutional panic and safeguarding protocol is immense. And it is exactly why the author of the source material drops a crucial pivot. A DSL is not a real detective. That is the moment the metaphor has to evolve. If we connect this to the bigger picture, taking the detective analogy to literally leads to dangerous malpractice.
Right. You cannot justify dragging your feet to a principal
Yep.
by claiming you are conducting a covert police sting.
Exactly. You have to anchor yourself to your actual mandate. You are not trying to solve the child like a puzzle. You are not trying to corner a suspect into a dramatic confession.
Because a detective's ultimate goal is a conviction. It's a definitive legal endpoint. They want to close the file.
Exactly the opposite of a DSL. A DSL's goal is a safety net. They're working toward ongoing, messy, never truly finished well-being.
Wow, yeah. A detective gathers evidence to build a case against someone. A DSL gathers context to build a network of protection around someone.
Right. Furthermore, a real detective is allowed to directly challenge a suspect. They can push them, try to catch them in a lie, apply pressure to crack their story.
But if a DSL applies that kind of pressure to a vulnerable child, they will instantly traumatize them and permanently shut down the disclosure.
Exactly. You keep the detective's tools, the disciplined curiosity, the noticing, the patience, but you completely abandon the detective's endgame.
That distinction is so critical for surviving the pressure from the school system. When the principal demands a resolution, the DSL's defense is, my job isn't to deliver a verdict today. My job is to ensure this student goes home safe tonight while we gather more context.
Yes, beautifully said.
But, that brings up another massive friction point. Even if you are the perfect Columbo and you tolerate ambiguity flawlessly and you never lead a witness, you are still just one person.
Right.
How can one DSL possibly notice the baseline behavioral changes of 800 or 1,000 students? That is just a mathematical impossibility. A single superhero DSL is an organizational bottleneck waiting to fail.
It's an impossible burden, which is why the source introduces the concept of the leadership layer.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, a truly robust safeguarding culture recognizes that one great detective is practically useless. You have to scale that mindset across the entire community. You have to create an environment where everyone is a detective.
But the friction there is real, right?
Yeah.
You're asking boarding house staff who are exhausted, underpaid, and working at 10 p.m. when kids' defenses are down to actively look for complex behavioral patterns.
Yeah. And you are asking academic tutors who are drowning in grading to pause and ask expansive open questions when a student hands in a concerning essay rather than just grading the grammar.
But you aren't asking them to do more paperwork, though. You are asking them to change the lens through which they view the work they're already doing.
Exactly.
It's teaching the school nurse to not just hand out an ice pack, but to possess the confidence to flag an injury narrative that doesn't quite match the bruise. It's turning professional noticing from a specialized administrative skill into a community-wide reflex.
And take that a step further, it even includes the students, building a culture where peer-to-peer noticing is encouraged and where students actually trust the adult faculty enough to speak up when their friend starts acting strangely.
That makes so much sense.
This raises an important question. One, the source poses directly to anyone in a leadership role. Are you the only detective in your system, holding all the puzzle pieces in your own office? Or have you done the hard structural work of building a culture of professional noticing around you?
Because a system reliant on one observant person is fundamentally fragile.
Absolutely.
It's just a profound framework.
Yeah.
So to pull all of these threads together for you listening today, the mindset starts with the absolute certainty that behavior will always speak before verbal disclosure. You have to train your eyes to see the ripples.
Right.
Second, when you do transition to engagement, you must embrace the open question and master the agonizing psychology of silence. Presence over performance. Third, build your professional ambiguity tolerance. Resist that intoxicating urge to jump to conclusions and maintain the discipline of holding multiple, conflicting hypotheses.
And finally, know when to evolve the metaphor. Your ultimate goal is to build a safety net, not to solve a case. The source material is explicitly written for safeguarding professionals in international schools, but, the psychological architecture of this approach applies anywhere human beings interact.
Oh, totally. Think about the practical applications outside of a school. If you are managing a remote corporate team, disciplined curiosity means noticing the subtle shifts in someone's engagement on video calls over a month.
Exactly.
Or if you have a friend who is slowly withdrawing, it means utilizing an open question and actually sitting in the discomfort of their answer without immediately offering unsolicited advice.
Right. Or even just navigating complex family dynamics. The ability to suspend your assumptions and just observe the baseline is a universal superpower. The source leaves us with a final reflection that cuts right to the core of this mindset. A truly great detective refuses to rush. They don't assume they already know the ending of the story, and they never force the narrative to fit their preconceived expectations.
Right.
They simply have the discipline to stay with the messy, contradictory details long enough for the true meaning to reveal itself.
So as you head back into your day, whether you are managing a team, raising a teenager, or just navigating your own relationships, we want to leave you with this provocation. Think about the spaces in your life where you might be rushing to resolution. Look at your environment and ask yourself, what am I currently overlooking because I am waiting for something more obvious?